Hi, everyone. It's Mitch from Pick Dawgz here with Chris and Ron. Week 10 of the college football 2024 season. Man, it has flown by, and everyone's had buys now, and we're kind of in that home stretch, turning the corner into November. And you got to remember, the season ends the weekend after Thanksgiving. Really not a lot of time left here to jiggle in the standings. Chris? Speaking of jiggling in the standings, what are you looking at college football this week? What do you think of this card?
I was hoping I was going to dodge that, but clearly it wasn't going to happen. Yeah, no, it's a great card this week. Maybe not the whole star-studded schedule we had last week, but there's still some marquee games here. Still got a couple big Big Ten matchups, so I'm excited. Diego Pavia mania keeps rolling on. Excited for that, so hopefully you can do it again this week.
It seems that while we talked about not a lot of marquee matchups, there's still a lot of upsets and a lot of action going on down there. And even when there's not upsets, games that have turned into tests. And I think what we see this week is that while it might not be the place for a lot of upsets or big games as you would think, it's some spots where you could see some teams kind of say, what, we got 1 month to play for, and we're going to leave it all out on the field. We start off with them leaving it all on the field. Penn State taking on Ohio State. We got quarterback issues here at Penn State with Allard, a question mark to start this game. Heard mixed if he's going to go, he's not going to go. But we all know if you're ranked in the top 5 and your quarterback's injured, no playoffs for you. It's just the way that it works. The standard has been set. Chris, Ohio State, Penn State.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? But I'm going to lean towards Ohio State here. I don't love the Buckeyes, but James Franklin has really struggled in these step-up spots against the big teams in the Big Ten historically. And I just feel a lot better about Ohio State's quarterback situation right now. Just don't know if it's going to be Drew Aller or Bo Perbula here for Penn State. So I think Ohio State can get the job done. I'm going to lay the points with Ohio State here.
I'm going to take Ohio State as well. When you look at this matchup in the last few years, Ohio State's not been great against the spread, but a lot of these spreads have been in the double digits, but now we get them at a 3.5-point spread. I think there's value there, and I think when you look at this special teams matchup, Ohio State has a huge advantage in this game. I think Penn State, one of the weakest special teams units, not just in the Big Ten, but in power football in general. I think Ohio State takes this one, wins it by a touchdown.
I'm going to have to disagree. I'm going to roll with Penn State in this one. We saw Ohio State in their big test this season, really the only tough game that they had on the schedule. They lost. It was on the road, and just like this one is, and it was against a team that beat them in the second half. Ohio State did not look good last week against Nebraska. That one was at home in the Horseshoe. Really no penalty for them. Meanwhile, Texas struggles on the road against a Vandy team that beat Alabama, and they get dropped 2 spots. But Ohio State, struggles against Nebraska and no penalty by the voters, which is crazy, especially since they were already a team with 1 loss. And the thing is that we've seen Penn State be clearly a second half team all season long. It's just like they were last week against Wisconsin on the road in Madison. I think Penn State's played a tougher schedule. I think they're the better team in this one. I really don't like the quarterback play of Ohio State. And in the game that's going to be decided in the second half late, man, a quarterback that's as bad as the Ohio State quarterback situation. I don't care who else you got. I think Ryan Day on the farewell tour here in Columbus. I'm going to take Penn State. For our next game, we go to another ranked team. It's the Miami Hurricanes getting past Florida State last week, and they're up against Duke, who's been a little bit of a thorn in their side in recent years. Duke winning last year 45-21. That game was also in Miami. That was 2 years ago. That game was also in Miami. Miami looking for payback. Ron?
I think they get it. I like Miami big in this one. I just think Duke is a little bit overrated when you look at their record. Looks strong on paper, but also really weak strength of schedule, especially in non-conference play. And now, I just think Miami's the much better team in all facets of the game. Last week, I thought it was a tough spot for them against Florida State defense, but they still put up 36 points, 450 yards, and it was able to cover the spread by just a point in that one. But I just think, like I said, Miami, the better team in all facets of the game. I'll lay the points with the Canes.
Miami ranked number 1 in yards per game at 580.8, while Duke is ranked 109th in yards per game offensively. I just don't see anything here from the Duke defense that's going to slow down Miami. I think that the Canes, what we're starting to see is a really, really balanced offensive and defensive attack, a really balanced offensive attack, running and passing the football. I think the defense is only going to improve, and the athletes are there on defense. And I said this last week. It's just they seem to be out of position at times, and I think we're starting to see that less and less. I'm going to take Miami in a rout. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take Miami as well. I think Duke's only shot here was to be able to, create some havoc around Cam Ward, maybe force a couple turnovers. But hey, they won the turnover battle. They were +6 against SMU last week and still lost. So for me, there's just nothing here with Duke offensively to think that they can hang with Miami for a full 60 minutes. I think this one is over fairly early. I'm going to take Miami as well. I'm going to lay the points.
All right. Well, next up on the schedule, we roll with to the SEC, where Arkansas takes on Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I'd have to say, a little bit disappointing at this point. I personally believe that, it's the Jackson Dart Farewell Tour, but it's also the maybe, trying to lure Arch Manning to Oxford. I do believe that's where he ends up after this season. Thankful for the transfer portal. My grandfather played there. My uncle played there. I'm going to play there type situation. And it just seems just ripe for the picking, especially with all the problems that Texas is having and their impending doom if they do happen to make it to the playoffs, if they can somehow squeak by Texas A&M in the season ender. But I think when we look at, Arkansas, definitely headed in the right direction, just not sure it's enough of the right direction for me. But laying a touchdown on the road in Fayetteville from Ole Miss, I don't think so. I'm going to take the Hogs here with the points at home. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take the Hogs as well. SEC underdogs in conference play have been absolute money this season. I think they're hitting around like almost 70%. And, Ole Miss just has not been the same team since conference play started. They were blowing teams out left and right because they had a weak strength of schedule, but then they lost to Kentucky and LSU. They didn't cover against Oklahoma. And this is an improved Arkansas team that usually plays well as an underdog. I'm going to take Arkansas. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit on the money line for Arkansas as well.
Yeah, but sorry about that.
I got to agree with you, Chris. I mean, Arkansas has done well in the underdog role, and specifically in this matchup. You look back; these teams play basically every year, and Arkansas is 10-1 in the last 11 meetings against the spread. Most of those games, they were the dogs. The home team has done well in this series as well, and Arkansas is battle tested. They've played a lot of tough teams in this conference already: LSU, Tennessee, A&M, at Auburn, at Oklahoma State, non-conference play. Really, nothing they haven't seen already. So I'm going to take the points with the Hogs.
We head to Army, where the Cadets take on Air Force, Michie Stadium. Army 22.5-point dogs here over the Force. I don't know, these commander-in-chief games, generally they bring out the best in teams, but I don't know if Air Force has the best this season. Chris, 0-7 against the number for the Force.
Yeah, it is not looking good. I think Air Force is going to get grounded here. I'm taking Army. I'm going to lay the big number. I know usually laying big numbers in service academy games can be frowned upon, but Air Force has just had nothing, and Navy ran all over Air Force earlier this season to a 34-7 victory. This Army team, they haven't had the toughest strength of schedule, but it's not like Air Force, I think, is going to pose much of a threat here. Army, 42-plus points in each of their last 4 games, winning all of them in blowout fashion. I'm going to take Army here late in the points.
Ron?
Yeah, this is a tough one. It's one I'll be staying away from, and usually I'd love to back a team that's 0-7 against the number. You can find good value, but I don't think it's enough points. I just think when you look at Air Force's run defense, it's been miserable this year. They've given up right around 200 rushing yards per game, over 5 yards a carry, and we know the offense has been one of the weakest in college football. Army, this is a team that wins and wins big. They've had a ton of blowout wins already this year. I think they take advantage of this matchup and take this game.
Yeah, this line looks extremely low. It's almost like a sucker, type situation. But I just don't see Air Force having any game plan, any way of getting there against this Army team. This is a good Army team, and while the military academies, didn't hold up last week against Notre Dame with Navy representing, Army might actually be the better of those two as well. And I like Army here, going to lay the points. Next one up, we've got Michigan taking on Oregon. For Michigan, the season kind of has a little bit gotten away from them. They've been beating the teams with losing records and the team with winning records, not so good. But when's the last time we saw Michigan as a 15-point home dog It's the defending national champs against number one. In order to be the man, you got to beat the man. Ron?
Yeah, I think the key is this is more than 2 touchdowns. Now I think there's value with Michigan. This is still a strong defensive team, and they've been one-dimensional all season offensively. Haven't been able to really find any kind of good quarterback play. But Oregon, we've seen recently they've struggled to stop the run. They've gave up against Purdue, over 200 rushing yards, 5 yards a carry. Even against Illinois in the blowout win, it was over 4 yards a carry in that one. So if Michigan can move the ball on the ground and play solid defensively, keep this game more low scoring, I think getting more than 2 touchdowns enough for me. So I'm going to take the points.
I'm taking Michigan as well with the points, a little on the money line as well. To me, Oregon, one of the weaker number ones out there that we've seen in recent years. And, I think they're ripe for the pick. And they might be number one in the regular season. There's no way they're winning a national championship. Chris?
Yeah, I don't have them penciled in for the national championship, but I'm going to lay the points here. Dan Lanning, as a road favorite, has just been crushing teams. 11-0 straight up, 9-2 against the number. Oregon winning those games by around 26 points per game. For me, Michigan just doesn't have it. I mean, the quarterback play is brutal for Michigan. And while it is a big number, hopefully maybe some buyback to get it under 2 touchdowns. But I still think that Oregon should have no problem here. I'm going to take Oregon.
World needs ditch diggers too, Chris. We've got Georgia up against Florida in the cocktail party. This one, of course, in Jacksonville, split right down the middle. Georgia, 16-point dogs in this one against the Gators in a rivalry game that generally the games are not really all that close, and it's Georgia that's absolutely dominated the last 7 years, winning 6 of the 7 games. The one win, well, it was a Florida win, and they were 2.5-point dogs in that game. So Florida's covered twice as dogs recently. Georgia winning last year as a 14.5-point favorite in this one. I like the way Georgia's playing. I think Georgia with a chip on their shoulder always plays better. But, I thought the same thing about Florida. I think that they're a little bit underrated because of that early game against Miami where they were on national TV, and then the Texas A&M game where they were still trying to figure things out. Florida's got some good athletes on this team. They're not like a scrub team by any stretch of the imagination. I like Georgia to win, but I think it's closer than the number. Chris?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm taking Florida in the points. I think Georgia wins, maybe by 2 touchdowns, though. Since, laying the 10.5 and covering easily against Clemson in the opener, they failed to cover 4 straight as a double-digit favorite. And we've seen Georgia, going back to even last year and even the year before, struggle as a big favorite. Florida, I think, obviously, rivalry game. I think they're going to treat it as such. And I think it's going to be a little bit closer than the number. So give me Florida in the points as well.
Ron?
For me, I really like the under in this game. You got an offense in the Gators with DJ Lagway. Looked great against Kentucky, but now you face Georgia. I still think I worry about that inexperience there in that quarterback play. And it was a game where Florida ran for about 200 rushing yards. I don't think you're going to get that against this Georgia defense, one of the best run defenses in the nation. So I do expect Florida to struggle, and also the offensive line. I think Lagway is probably going to get a few sacks in this one. Georgia had 7 of them against Texas. We know Ewers and Manning both struggled in that one. So I think the Gators offense struggles, but I also think the Gators defense has improved recently and overall this season. I like both of these special teams units. I think they have some of the best punters in the country. So I think this total set way too high. We've seen some high-scoring games in this series. This one I think goes well under.
Next up, we head to the Big 12, and it's rare where you see teams from the big conferences get super disrespected, but you got to believe that Iowa State is certainly headed in that direction at this point because, they're unbeaten and they just get no love at all. Of course, the other unbeaten in the Big 12, BYU, probably one of the Pick Dawgz show teams this year. Romanelli picking them every single week to lose. I think that in this particular game, though, Texas Tech presents some challenges here. Ron?
I agree. I'll fade BYU even when they're not playing this week, but I'll also take Texas Tech plus the points. I think that when you look at that Iowa State game against UCF, that was a really close one. UCF had over 350 rushing yards in that one, 9 yards a carry. That run defense for the Cyclones has not been great overall this season. They're giving up 5 yards a carry. The Red Raiders, they can move the ball on the ground. We saw them run it 50 times against TCU. This is one of the weaker defenses in football and college football right now, but the offense is good enough for me to take the points. I think this one's going to be close.
Yeah, I'm on Texas Tech as well. I just don't love Iowa State, but they keep getting it done. Last week against UCF, it was sad, in the fourth quarter when UCF was just marching up and down the field. And you had to say to yourself, well, if they put that fourth string quarterback in right out of the gate, maybe we would see a different story. And I think, UCF has finally found their starter out of Delray Beach, Florida, there at quarterback. But I think, Texas Tech presents a lot of those same problems. And you have 14.5 with a team that can throw the football and move the football like Texas Tech. At the very least, you're asking for the back door. You're asking for a back door. Chris, no one's ever not accused you of asking for the back door.
Give me Texas Tech. Give me the points. I think that, I think Texas Tech offensively can keep themselves in this game. We've seen Iowa State kind of just get by earlier in the season. I mean, they got by Houston. They only scored 20 points, but they rode the defense to the cover there. They beat up on Baylor, beat up on West Virginia. But for me, that game against UCF was a bit of an eye-opener that there are still some cracks in Iowa State. And I think that Iowa State's right now just worried about getting through undefeated, getting to the Big 12 title game to make sure that they can get to the college football playoff. No style points necessary. So give me Texas Tech plus the points here.
Next up, we go to Houston, where the Cougs take on Kansas State. Houston, terrible off the start of the season. I think the issue was just zero returning players from last year's team. And Kansas State, still thinking they have an outside shot at the Big 12 title game, even though there are two undefeated teams ahead of them. The thing is about Houston, you have to remember they've won 2 of their last 3 games now, including a win over TCU, which ironically wears the same colors as Kansas State. Any way they think that, well, we beat this purple and silver team, we can beat that purple and silver team. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take Kansas State here. I'm not ready to buy into Houston just yet. I know they have that one win over already over a purple and silver team already for sure, but they congrats, you beat Utah's third string quarterback, a Utah team that just is having a down year. Realistically, Houston's still 17 points or less in 6 of their 8 games this season. This Kansas State team, I'm not downgrading them because they barely got by Kansas in a rivalry game. I think Kansas State's just a much better team here. I think they run all over Houston here. I'm taking Kansas State.
Ron?
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I think when you look at Houston and their 2 nice wins recently, it was games where they ran it about 45, 50 times and ran the ball very well. Kansas State, though, has one of the better run defenses in this conference. So for me, I just think it's an uphill battle when you have a one-dimensional offense and an offense I don't really trust at all in this game. Yes, Houston's defense is good and really underrated, not really talked about enough, but I think K-State does enough offensively. They've been able to score 33 points per game to win this game and cover the spread.
I like Houston in this one. I know that all eyes will be on the basketball team with that opener against Jackson State on Monday. Definitely going to be a nail-biter. But I think this particular game, I just think Houston keeps it close enough. I think Kansas State a little bit overrated this season. That's why they're just 3-5 against 3-5 against the number this season. It's like they're good, but they're not like good enough to blow people out. And Houston starting to at least put it together. We've seen Houston getting some pretty good numbers all season long. They're used to playing in the underdog role. I'll give the Cougs a shot to at least cover. This is like one of those ones that Kansas State wins by like 8, and everyone's like, oh, come on, just score, one more, and they take a knee. Indiana versus Michigan State. We were talking before the show. If I just took the Indiana games out of my premium pick record, I would be well to the plus. I have a winning record in college football this year, but the problem is it's not winning enough because the juice makes me negative on the units still. Not too bad, but I have a shot. It's one of those things that might go back and forth until bowl season. But Indiana's been my kryptonite, them and Northwestern the other way. Ron, Michigan State, Sparty. To me, they did me dirty against Michigan. I thought that was a game they could win.
Well, I think this is a game they can win. Give me Michigan State plus the points on the money line. I think their defense is good enough, and honestly, their offense has made enough strides as the season's gone along. They've been able to run the football a lot better recently against Iowa, over 200 rushing yards, 5 yards a carry. Even against Michigan, 160 rushing yards. I think Indiana, give them credit. We've talked about it all season. This team, Kurt Signetti, the culture has changed. This is going to be a tough team in the Big Ten, not just this year, obviously, but for years to come. But this is a classic trap spot on the road in a tough place against a team and a program that's improving. It's had a couple of down years in a row. Give me the Spartans in this one. They get a statement win.
I think that Smith has the Spartans going in the right direction. I think, it's going to take him another year to get people to buy into his system, to get his players in there. But he won at Oregon State, and he had DJU as his quarterback, man. So things are possible here. He won, when he was a player as well. So I think that, he's kind of that type of guy. I think it's just a matter of time before Michigan State is relevant again. I think this is a big game for them. I agree with Ron. I think they are a very, very live dog in this game. I had them on the money line last week, so I'm not counting my money, but I've gone against Indiana every single week. I'm going to go against them in here. I think, if Smith can get his old wide receivers back from when he was the quarterback at Oregon State, Chad Johnson, Chad Ochocinco, and TJ Hushmanzada, he'll be right back in it. I mean, I kind of have an allegiance to guys that really did me really good when they were players who are now coaches. And Smith was one of those guys. That fiesta with Dennis Erickson coaching Oregon State against Notre Dame was one of the biggest beatdowns like in the history of Notre Dame football. And I think, I think he has that right mindset to get Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State's a top-notch place, They just got to turn some things around. I think Smith's the guy. He's their second shot at a John Smith. They had John L. Smith, now they have the good John Smith.
What was that you were saying earlier? The world needs
ditch diggers. You always take Indiana. That's what he said.
The world needs ditch diggers too? Yeah. Give me Psycho Sig. Give me the Hoosiers. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I've had no reason to deviate from it here. Last week just showed me that you can be without Curtis Warwick. Taven Jackson could take over. You have to switch up your game plan, but the result's still going to be the same. This is a really good Indiana team that now has college football playoff aspirations. So give me Indiana. Michigan State did me dirty last week, and I'm not going to forgive them anytime soon.
Can't spell aspirations without ass. Got South Carolina taking on Texas A&M in SEC action. The Aggies feeling it. I mean, they're starting to really play some good football. Once again, a team that was trailing at halftime last week. Another game that did me dirty. I took LSU in that one against Texas A&M. I thought I was good at halftime, and then it was 17-7 at halftime. And then A&M started playing, and here they are up against South Carolina, who really has played a very, very tough schedule here in the SEC. And they have played everybody really, really tough. I think they play A&M tough in this one as well. I think, there's a reason why the line here is 2.5. When you see A&M, who's pretty much an elite team, and you see South Carolina who's 4-3. They lost to Bama and Tuscaloosa by 2. South Carolina did. So, they're not going to see anything here. They whipped Oklahoma's ass last week too. And the game against Ole Miss is a throwout. But you got to remember, they took Akron behind the woodshed. So I'm going to go with South Carolina in this one. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take South Carolina. I might sprinkle on it again later in the week if this game ticks up even further. I think all the love for Marcel Reed with how he performed in that game against LSU might draw a little bit of attention towards A&M here. But like you said, South Carolina's been competitive. Lost by 2 to Alabama. They lost by 3 at home against LSU. I think they can be competitive here as well. I'm going to take the Gamecocks and the points.
Yeah, I think situationally this is a great spot for South Carolina. A&M coming off the big comeback win against LSU. Now you go on the road. South Carolina is playing with revenge as they lost to A&M last year, and if they would have won that game, they would have been in the bowl game. But, South Carolina, this team, offensive line-wise, really struggling. Defensive line, one of the best in the conference. It's been, I like the under because I think we see a lot of sacks and tackle for losses, but I think the home dog is live. I think their defense is good enough, especially in the secondary. So give me the points here with South Carolina and the under.
We head to the ACC where Clemson is now entering the top 10 in the rankings. After that loss against Georgia, we've seen Clemson play, and they really had just one half of bad football. They were tied with Georgia at halftime in that game. And we look at Georgia, and that first half against Clemson, they were tested. I didn't love the play calling in that game by Georgia, but that's a whole different story. In the second half they got steamrolled, but since then they have been very, very tough. Louisville now with another tough opponent. You got to remember they played Miami, they played Notre Dame, now they play Clemson. Chris?
Yeah, I'm looking at the over here. Lean towards Clemson laying the points, but I like the over. Clemson's offense has just been rolling along for the most part, 40 plus in 5 of the last 6 games they've all won. But we've also seen in a couple of spots where defense has kind of slipped up a little bit and maybe taking their foot off of the gas as the game's progressed. I think Louisville can at least hang some points in this one as well. I think the total's a little bit low. I thought it was going to open in the high 60s, but to get it at 61, I'll take the over with a lean towards Clemson.
Ron?
I'm going to take Louisville plus the points. I mean, Clemson's been impressive, but when you look at that schedule, yes, the first game against Georgia, but they got crushed. Since then, Appalachian State, NC State, Stanford, FSU, Wake, and Virginia. None of those teams even close to as strong as this Louisville team, in my opinion. And like Mitch mentioned, they played Miami, Notre Dame, also SMU, and Boston College on the road last week. So I think Louisville's more battle-tested. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this Louisville team overall, but I will say their offense has improved recently. I'm still not ready to give up on that defense. And I think this is going to be a close game and a shootout.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Ron and Chris were saying. Louisville is ass. And I think the thing is here is that, what their wins have come against the bad teams. When they played against the good teams, they haven't won. And when they played against the bad teams, they barely won, except for that 49-14 win over Jacksonville State. And if you got to go all the way back to August 31st, where they took on Austin Peay and won 52-0. Outside of that, squeaking by mediocrity. And I think they're not going to see any mediocrity here. We're getting into November football in Clemson, just a bad place to be. We know that Dabo Swinney, at a certain point of the season, never loses at home. Oh, this one's going to get ugly. They're going to go running down the hill and rubbing the rock and all that other stuff. Oh, man, what a crappy day to be on Louisville. We got USC taking on Washington, a battle of old Pac-12 teams. Washington, I got to say, last week up against Indiana, getting the ball, the opening kickoff, matriculating right down the field. Looked like they're ready to score, take an early lead, and pick 6 goes the other way. And forget it, I was done again betting against Indiana. But the Huskies certainly have things going in the right direction, in a good direction overall. It's a transitional year for them, and I think they've accepted that. But I think they have a lot of the pieces in place. Jeb Fish, he's got, Belichick's son, Steve Belichick, running the defense there. And I think good things are going to happen there. But USC, just an absolute disaster. Lincoln Riley going from NFL candidate to, 4-9 in his last 13. Ron?
Yeah, I think on paper, when you look at this Washington roster and kind of a rebuild year for them, I think the record right now makes sense of where we expect them to be. But then you look at the fact that Washington's outgained their opponent in every single game this season, even in their 4 losses. I think this team's been rather unlucky this year. I think they're actually better than their record, better than expectations, and I like their spot in this one. I know it's a revenge game for USC after losing to the Huskies last year, but I still think Washington's a much better team on both sides of the ball. So after back-to-back losses on the road, I think Washington comes home, picks up a big win.
I like Washington as well. I think that differential is mostly because of the Washington defense, who's been super strong with Belichick running the show. And I think that, especially we saw it down by the goal line last week against Indiana, where Indiana settled for field goals inside the 5-yard line a couple of times. And, but it didn't matter. They scored 1 million points overall. But the thing is that I think Washington they're okay. It's like we talked about DeBoer and, leaving, and we talked about stuff. And I think Fish is an upgrade overall, and I think he will be over the long term. He's got that Patriots pedigree, and I think, he's made a decision. He said, I look around, I look at the teams that win championships, I look at the teams that contend, and they have NFL coaching staffs, guys with NFL experience. And that's what I'm going to hire under me. And I think when you have all those guys with NFL coaching experience, you can't help but have good teams, and I think that's where Washington's headed. I'm going to take them here. Chris?
Yeah, I'm taking Washington as well. All their struggles this season have been on the road, and I know USC's struggles have come on the road a lot of times when they've had to make the cross-country road trip, but I think Washington's defense is going to be the difference here. We've seen USC really being consistent with their offense in recent games, and Washington, at home, took care of Michigan. They stifled Northwestern. They were competitive against Washington State. I think Washington is the better team here, so I'm going to go with Washington plus the points.
Got Tennessee taking on Kentucky. Tennessee had the week off last week after beating Alabama. That's a little time for the smoke from those cigars to clear. Meanwhile, Kentucky starting to really go downhill in a hurry. And, it just seems to be the same old story, different year for Kentucky, but with the downslide starting a little bit earlier. I've always said that Kentucky's downslide starts at the start of college basketball season. But this year, it actually started a little bit earlier. Kentucky generally starts off like 6-0, 5-1 to start the season. Then they get deeper into that SEC schedule and the slide begins. But the thing is, and that just so happens to coincide with college basketball season, we got a new head coach in college basketball over at Kentucky. I think we're going to have a new head coach in football after this season, too. I think Stoops has had a good run there at Kentucky, but I think he's not going to get them any further than he's ever gotten them. And I think he knows that, too. I think that Tennessee wins this one for fun. I like Tennessee, and I think Stoops probably on his way out at Kentucky. Chris?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it on Monday's show during our winners and losers segment, but I still think that Kentucky might be the worst team in the SEC. I don't like their quarterback, Brock Vandagriff. The running game's not working. The defense is decent, but there's only so much you can do with that before you got to score points to try to win football games. And while Tennessee's offense has definitely cooled off, from the blowouts that they had against weak competition early in the season, I still think they're heads and shoulders the better team here. I just want no part of Kentucky in their current form. Give me Tennessee in a blowout.
Ron?
Yeah, this has been a one-sided series. Tennessee's 21-6 against the spread in the last 27 meetings. And I like Tennessee in this one as well, laying the points. But I also like the over. I think this is a breakout spot for the Vols offense. It had a great start to the year in non-conference play. Has not been anywhere near as strong in SEC play. But Kentucky's defense, it's been getting crushed recently in the swamp against the Gators. But even last week, 500 yards given up to Auburn. They cannot stop the run right now. So give me the over and Tennessee.
Next up, we go to the ACC as we close out the night. And we got two teams that are playoff contenders here. No doubt about it. Contenders to go to the ACC championship game at least. SMU had that early season loss against BYU, which does not look so bad anymore. And meanwhile, Pitt running a perfect slate here, but they've got some wood to chop ahead of them. I think they got Miami on the schedule. So, Chris, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I do lean towards Pitt and the points. I want to see the quarterback situation, how it progresses throughout the week. Pitt's quarterback, Eli Holstein, was dealing with an injury, and he's key to this offense clicking. But I've seen SMU, they're missing their top receiver, RJ Maryland. He was a big part of that offense at tight end. So I think this could be a one-score game, especially if Holstein's health improves to where he can play. So I'll take Pitt plus the 7.5 in this one.
Actually, Pitt does not have Miami on the schedule this year. They have Clemson up in 2 weeks. Ron?
I like SMU in a blowout. I think Pittsburgh's been one of the more fortunate teams in college football this year. Take a look at that schedule. They've not really been tested by anybody, and a lot of home games thrown in there. I just think this is a SMU team. Like Mitch said, the loss against BYU at the time looked pretty ugly because SMU was I think 11-point favorite in that game, 12-point favorite. Not anymore, and SMU's on a roll right now. They were -6, like Chris mentioned earlier in the show, -6 in the turnover battle last week. They still found a way to win it without their top receiver. I think they win this game by double digits.
Yeah, SMU gets a win here. BC, Virginia, and Cal to close out the regular season there. So they will go undefeated in the ACC if they can win that. So this is a big one, but I'll tell you what, I think Pitt, they just continue to buck the odds, man. I'm going to roll with Pitt in this thing. I think SMU's playing well. I know they really hit the transfer portal hard in the offseason, but they also haven't played anybody either. And I think when they did play somebody, they lost. And, outside of that, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, Duke, they played the all-academic team. I'm going to roll with Pitt. Well, that wraps up Week 10 of the college football schedule. Not the sexiest card, but you never know, man. Throw a couple points one way or the other, throw a couple bucks on one team, and It's like watching, two really bad teams that you got to bet on the game. Chris, anything else to add?
Yeah, I'm a little bit shocked we don't have any real late night action. I think the 3 8 o'clock games is where the schedule cuts off. But hey, gives us an early night as we prep for college basketball on Monday.
I think it was hoped that we would have a World Series game up against this, and it's still possible. But I think that was the reasoning behind it. The NBA more than likely will be in action, so don't be standing alone. And we also know that it's hockey night in Canada, as we all know. But yeah, the NBA's got 10 games scheduled for Saturday, with the earliest start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be no shortage of action, especially with the Raptors hosting the Kings. Ron, anything else to add?
Yeah, there's some rivalry games. There's some games with some playoff implications. So it should be a fun card. I think definitely, like Chris mentioned, the early part of the card is the more entertaining part. But it's going to be tough to get ready for college basketball. So we can definitely use this to our advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with that Penn State, Ohio State being the noon game as opposed to the 8 p.m. at night game, it actually makes it a better game and more like college football like. And, it's having everything over early isn't such a bad thing once in a while for college football, because these have been some late nights with these Colorado games and, even Miami playing that late night game against Cal, which, seemed to go on all night as well. But I think next week we return to the late night action with Washington State. We got the Holy War as Utah hosts BYU, Hawaii, UNLV, the one we've all been waiting for. LSU, Alabama, the Notre Dame, Florida State game, which really didn't come up how they had hoped. And, Chris, New Mexico State, Western Kentucky, all over it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Make it a winning week. We appreciate you all. Of course, we'll be back throughout the week. Ron does his NFL rundown. That will be continuing. And, of course, he'll be starting his college basketball bank shot breakdown starting on Monday. Of course, Chris doing videos every day, as well as the wraparound NHL video that he does each and every day. Don't call it the reach around. This is Mitch. Thanks for joining us. Make it a winning week. We appreciate each and every one of you.